We are live. Welcome Tamara. Welcome everyone who is following the live. I'm sure most of you are familiar with video games, but as you could read in the description, what happens behind the scenes before a company launches a video game in your country. And it's not just about translation, there's quite a complex process behind it. And so today we invited Tamara, who, like myself, is an alumna of the Best organization. So we are both in the Best Alumni Network Association. And she's going to share some her knowledge about it because she have a background in engineering management. And she's also been working in the video games, with video games in general for over 10 years, both as a translator and also as a project manager. And now she's leading the localization department at Frontier Developments, which is a Cambridge-based independent developer and publisher. So do ask your questions in the live chat, and I will read your questions and your comments towards the end of Tamara's presentation. Remember to write a complete question because there's a slight delay between the two of us and yourself. So do write a complete question, not just can you repeat please, because otherwise it's a bit difficult to understand what you are referring to. Tamara, what else about yourself? And above all, does Super Mario speak Italian? Now we want to know.
Thank you for the introduction, Clelia. Super Mario is a Japanese character, and he only received his Italian personality, albeit through the design process. So no, Mario does not speak Italian, really. Speaks Japanese. Okay, so let's talk about video game localization. So as Clelia mentioned, I used to be the member of Best Budapest back in the days. And then after that, I started working as a technical translator and shifted on to video game translation and localization. At the moment, I work in Cambridge for Frontier Developments. Let me just tell just a couple of words about who we are at Frontier. Frontier was founded in 1994, so we've been around for more than 25 years now. We were founded by David Braben, who is our current CEO, and he was the creator of an 80s space simulation game called Elite, which is now in a cult status. I think I can say that. Previously, Frontier was a work-for-hire studio, so we were working for external publishers such as Microsoft or Atari, and we shifted to self-publishing in 2014. We mainly publish and develop games for computers and consoles. So at the moment, that would be mainly PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And we are now starting to publish games done by external developers, which is again a really exciting development at Frontier. I have been with the company for almost 5 years now, and I was hired as part of this transition to self-publishing when Frontier had to build up all their publishing functions from the ground up. So I was hired as the localization person who would create and set up all the workflows related to translating our games. And back then I was a one-woman department, but by now we have grown to be a team. So in addition to myself, I have 4 localization coordinators, and we also have 2 localization testers. A couple of titles that we have published. Back then I was a one-woman. So we have Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, Zoo Tycoon for Xbox, Kinectimals, Disneyland Adventures, again for Kinect, Lost Winds, or the later one, already in the self-publishing era, would be Elite Dangerous, Planet Coaster, Planet Zoo, Jurassic World Evolution. All right, so I think we sort of have an understanding of what a video game is, but maybe we're not that clear about what localization means. So this is a definition from the International Game Developers Association. So localization, abbreviated as LNN, is the process of creating a product suited to a specific locale. So from the definition, we can see that this is a bit broader than simply translating text from one language to another. A couple of words about the games industry. So last year, the value of the industry was estimated to be $150 billion, which is about as much as the films industry and the music industry combined. And it is also growing quite steadily. So we've been seeing a 10% year-on-year growth. If you think of a very specific area of the games industry, which is esports, so for example, in the US, a League of Legends tournament would have a higher viewership than NBA or the basketball league championships. And we also have some pretty big IPs, not just Super Mario, but also Minecraft, Fortnite, Pokemon, Candy Crush, just to mention a few. You can see Assassin's Creed there. Put it there because I just finished the Origins from Assassin's Creed game, and it has recently been made into a film, or The Witcher 3, published by a Polish developer, and that has been made into a Netflix series, and it has been really, really successful. So we do have some quite big IPs now in games. And if you think back to the 90s, when video games was really the domain of these geek teen boys who were not cool enough to be in the football team, now games have become practically household names. Chances are that your mom plays Candy Crush Saga every now and then. And how do the global markets look like? These are the 10 biggest game markets in 2019. Interesting fact, in 2018, China was actually the biggest one, and they managed to overtake the US. Now they are back in the second position, but they are very, very close to each other. So if you look at this list of countries, only about 2.5 of them, the US, UK, and kind of Canada, are English-speaking countries. So now you can see why there is a need to publish games in multiple languages. And just to confirm, so game translation doesn't only work from English. Not all the developers are in the UK wanting to publish their games in the rest of the world, but also Japan and nowadays China and Korea, they have a pretty big games industry. So if you think of Tencent, the media giant in China, and then successful games, they are being translated into English and then into the rest of the languages. Since we come from an engineering background, let me start with talking a little bit about the technical aspects of game localization. So first of all, we handle quite a huge amount of data. If we think of a multiplayer online game, or a big game like Are Really Dangerous, which is close to 1 million words in game, that is about as big as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, plus The Hobbit, plus the Silmarillion long stuff. It is quite a huge amount of data. And that's just the text, and we haven't even mentioned voice affecting dialogues. If you have this idea about translators that they sit in half-lit rooms with a book that they translate on one side and a mighty dictionary on the other, that's not how things work at the moment. So we work with various file formats, XMLs, JSONs, XLS, Excel spreadsheets, where we have to kind of write scripts to extract the translatable text from these formats. And if you work in software development, then you're probably familiar with the idea of the continuous development cycle, whereas previously you have brought the product into the market and that was it. You moved on to the next big thing. Now there are constant updates, patches, new content, new features injected into your product, and games are pretty much the same. If you work in mobile game development, then you might have quick cycles like weekly updates or bi-weekly updates. On a more double and AAA area, we would have maybe quarterly or yearly bigger downloadable content releases. But still, there is continuous work going on, and multiple work streams happening at the same time. So you cannot wait for the previous workflow step to be completely finished before you get started. In our case, this means that the text is not 100% finished and polished by the time you start translating it. Of course, in this environment, you need to rely on automation. You cannot just start Cinderella work trying to pick out what are the new things, what have changed, especially if you have 1 million words to go through, right? And of course, since it's a very tight and lean production cycle, we need to ensure that there is a timely communication all along the pipeline. And of course, when you think of technical aspects of translation, you can't help asking about machine translation and technologies like text-to-speech, intertext-to-speech conversion. At the moment, at Frontier, we don't use machine translation a lot. We love using both MP and text-to-speech as a placeholder. So for performing initial checks, or just to see how a dialogue sounds like in game, more or less, to see if a line is triggered at all. But for example, at EA Games, they do have their own custom-trained machine translation engines. And if you're familiar with EA, with Electronic Arts, their portfolio, they have FIFA, which is a football game. They have the Battlefield games, which are shooters. So if you think of the word shoot, it could have very different meaning in these contexts. So they have franchise-based engines. So let me just show you how our translation environment looks like. So what you see here is the translation grid. So the translatable text would be broken down into individual segments, most of them sentences or paragraphs or game strings. You would also have a database of your previous translations. So you see if you have already translated something which is similar to what you're currently dealing with. You would also have a glossary in place to make sure that places, creatures, weapons, they are translated consistently. Because obviously, since you have such huge volumes, such a tight production deadline, you will have a bigger team working online, real time, on the same text, and you need to ensure that everything is done consistently. And just a quick overview of the workflow, how it would look like in most of the development, really. So the game text is written by game designers or narrative writers, game writers. UI design, the gameplay team, coders, all this text will go into the game build, which we constantly monitor real time, and it would pick up all the strings that have been added, changed, i.e. they need some love from translators, and these strings will be transferred into our CAT, which is computer-aided translation environment, or TENT, which is translation environment. So a CAT tool is what I've shown in the previous screenshot. So the idea is very similar to the CAD and CAM tools that we use in other fields of engineering. So it just provides you the tool set to help automate your work, have these repetitive tasks, and reducing errors. So and also obviously the online collaboration, and then some project management tools, for example, tracking where a certain asset is in the pipeline. Since we are both the developer and the publisher, we don't just work with the development assets, we also work with the publishing assets, which would be game trailers, websites, advertising, social campaigns, etc. So all these publishing texts would also go into the very same environment. And when we start working with external developers, again, that they will go into the very same environment. And this is the environment where our diligent translators and reviewers are doing their work. And I've already mentioned the dialogues. So these translated texts would be recorded by studios, and then the recorded lines would also be fed back into the game build. And of course, we cannot forget about quality assurance. So once the translation is done, our testers will check everything in game. After the technical aspects, let's just look at the linguistic aspects, because after all, we are talking about translation. So one of the challenges is you have to work with a pretty tight UI interface, and you have to squeeze in your words. So, for example, in our game Planet Zoo, you would have the list of animals with a name, species, and the gender, the sex of the animal. If you think of the word sex, and you think of the German word Geschlecht, which is about 3 times as long, so that's something you have to work around. Games have quite a unique language when it comes to translation. Translators tend to be divided into 2 main categories. You would have the technical translators on one side and the literary translators on the other side. Now, if you work with games, you have to be very technical and precise, but you also have to be a literary translator. If you work with dialogues, with the storyline, quite often poems and songs. And third, games have a unique language. If you think of words such as unlock, boost, XP, experience points, these have their own specific translations in the target language that you need to be familiar with. Often games would feature completely made up character names, places, objects like weapons, and other gear, monsters and creatures that you have to fight if you're in a role-playing game. So actually, this is probably my favorite part about doing a translation myself, and just trying to come up with a really creative names in my own language that reflects the intent of the lore of the game world. And an additional challenge is that while the translation is going on, translators often have little to no context. They receive a list of words, and we obviously try to provide them as much explanation as possibly can. But my favorite example here is the word back. So how do you translate it? Is it jumping back to the previous dialogue? Or is it something that you can put on your back, like your sword can be behind your back? Or if, for example, you have a spaceship or a car, that can be a back seat. So many different ways to translate this in a context of game. So you often have to query that with the developers to understand that string is going to be used. Gender and formality is again something that I don't think any other translator has to really deal with. It's a very specific thing. If you play a role-playing game, your character can often choose to be a male or female character, and it's role-playing, so there can be different levels of formality. When I was working on translating Fable 2 or 3, I don't remember, but you started that game as a young street rat, and by the time you finished the main quest line, you became the ruler, the king of the world. And there were side quests that you could do in both positions. So then people started to talk to you, address you, and you would address a filthy street rat in a very different manner than you would address your king. So that's a fun challenge to work around. And last but not least, working with placeholders. So what do I mean by that? Think of your own mother tongue and try to translate this one very simple sentence that can appear in a fetch quest. So take this item to a certain character in a certain town or location, and you don't know the gender of the character or the gender of the item name. You don't know whether it's one item, multiple items, whether it's one character or multiple characters, whether any of these stuff is a vowel or a consonant. And of course, if you're, for example, working at a Slavic language or Hungarian, which would have noun cases, then you can't really use those because this will always go into a nominative form. Yeah, fun challenge. Okay. And since we are working on a global market, we should not forget about the cultural aspects. of an entertainment product. Cultural culturalization, so cultural adaptation has, I identified 4 different levels to it. The very, very basic level would be the reactive culturalization, understanding if your region has age ratings or censorship. Practically, your game has to be approved by a central authority for release. The most typical example for this would be China. If you want to release the game there, then it has to go through a government approval. And the government makes sure that you respect some basic ideas, such as the integrity of the country. You cannot treat Taiwan as a separate country. You need to respect the army and the government of China. You need to respect the human body. So no skulls, bones, blood, gore, nothing of that sort. Going one step back, for example, in Japan or Arabic countries, nudity tends to be a very sensitive issue. So quite often, if you want to release a game there, you would make your characters wear a bit more clothing. And it's not just Eastern countries. Until recently, you couldn't publish anything in Germany which featured a swastika. Now that regulation has been changed, so if it's used in a correct history context, then you are allowed to use the symbol. The second level of culturalization would be showing respect to cultures. For example, if you picture certain cultures in your game. I have a really fun anecdote about Planet Coaster, one of our games. So in Planet Coaster, you build up your theme park, and in theme park, you don't just have rides, you also have food and drink stores. So there is a food store called Monsieur Fix. So it is French-style French fries store, and you can choose different toppings on your fries. And after release, we received a feedback from my French player saying, "Guys, I know that you're a British company and you would put vinegar on your chips, but if you have a French-style store, then please add mayo." Yeah. Now you can put mayo, curry sauce, all sorts of different things on your fries. And in Planet Zoo, we have different global themes. For example, you can create a Chinese-style zoo. And we created this nice Chinese lion dog statue. And our cultural advisor pointed it out that if you put this in game, then these always come in pairs. They are mirror images, female and the male Chinese lion dog. So if you do one, you kind of have to do the other one as well to be appropriate for the representation. And also, like, things were popping up whether it's appropriate to allow burgers to be sold in Indian themed zoos because of cows. So yeah, there are some fun questions that pop up on this level. The next level would be cultural expectation and working with those. It's about understanding how we learn, how we process information, how we interact with the games, how we like to be challenged, or what are the payment models that we are more comfortable with. For example, if you look at how Eastern and Western players play games, Chinese players are really, really motivated by having a list of objectives or collectibles that they can pick off. Western players don't mind just playing around, doing things. If you think of the games, the Sims series, where you can just create your household and people can go to work, have children, have arguments, etc. That's how Western people like playing big more than, for example, Asians. And the last level would be relatability, which is a proactive culturalization, which means that doing that extra step, going that extra mile to be more connected to your audience. I don't have any specific games examples for this, but for example, if you think of movies, the animation show, the animation movie Inside Out, there is a scene where the daddy is trying to feed some broccolis to the toddler, and the kid is going, "Don't give me broccolis." In the Japanese version, the broccolis were replaced by green peppers, because for Japanese children, it's green peppers which are the yucky vegetables. Or in Zootopia, there is a news anchor, which is a moose in the Canadian release, a panda in China, a koala in the Australian version, and a jaguar in Brazil, etc. So the news anchor would be a different animal based on the country of release. So this just gives a lot of interesting opportunities to connect with the audience. There is also a management aspect. I have shown you that quite interconnected flowchart and the ecosystem that we're part of. And a fun thing that I enjoy about being in localization is that I get to work with practically every single department at the company, both from the development and the publishing side. So, for example, we're in touch with the producers on budgets, deadlines, with the concept artist about the cultural aspects of the items, like I mentioned, the lion dog. With the animation team, localization teams often work with sound-driven animation. So if you have dialogues between people in your game, then you wouldn't start lip-syncing the recording, it goes the other way around. So the recording will determine how the mouth moves and there's a pause. That's a really interesting technology. We don't use it at the moment, but it's quite a standard thing in role-playing games. We work with the game designers and writers in case we have any doubts about the features or the meaning of the text or the context of the speak, like that. Of course, we're working with the QA department because our work also has to be tested by them. The audio team helps us implement the dialogue lines across all the different languages that we have to support. We work with coders about those placeholders that I mentioned before and maybe adding some gender variants if it's appropriate. Of course, with the publishers, we work with translating trailers, website, and ads for them. And by nature, of course, localization teams are quite multilingual, multinational, multicultural. So if I think of my own team, I'm Hungarian, and I have 4 coordinators, which are Portuguese, German, French, Chinese. We have a Russian tester and an Italian tester. So it is just a really fun environment. And we work for an English company, right? It's just a really fun mix of cultures. And I also feel that it's important to evangelize the cause of localization because publishing a game that will eventually become a global success it's not the responsibility of one sole department, right? It is a shared goal of everybody across the company, and this is something we should understand and respect and work together to achieve it. And localization is one of the lastest thing that tends to happen to a game. So that is the end of chain pressure from pretty much all sides. So what do we mean by that? From one side, we have the game designers asking, what is the lowest possible date for me to make any changes to the game text? From the other side, what's the earliest possible date when I can start working on the test? From the production team, what's the shortest possible time and the least possible money that you can make this happen? And from the translator side, what's the longest time and the most money I can get out of this business? So yeah, that's quite a fun. That's us in the middle. Although looking at my team, we have mainly women, so the beard is probably a bit smaller. And last but not least, this is a business, right? In game development and game publishing. So we constantly monitor and understand our localization returns to see which are the areas and the languages we want to invest in. We constantly monitor the monthly active users, the daily active users for each territory to understand where our most active players are. And that's also a business decision whether or not you would want to have an internal team or you would like to outsource the entire localization operation or have a hybrid model like we do with some part of the work happening internally and some being handled by an outsourced partner. And these were the topics that I wanted to throw out there. So if you have any questions about any of these that you would like to go into a bit more detail or depth, then please post questions and I'm happy to answer them to my best knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, it was. Oh, sorry. Yeah, unmute, of course. Thank you so much, Tamara. It was a lot of information, and yeah, it does look quite complex, quite complicated. There are a couple of questions here. One is if you have any advice for someone who would like to work in game localization. What should they do? You come from a management engineering background, which is broad. How could someone nowadays narrow down to become more knowledgeable, for example, to enter this role in particular in the industry?
There are quite a few nice entry pathways. One of them that I see many people do is start on the testing side. It is relatively easy to get into a localization tester position for one of the big outsourced vendors out there. Another interesting thing is, just like with every profession, companies are looking for juniors with a lot of experience. So you can actually, but then, how do you get experience if you can't get a job? So there are loads of community initiatives out there. They are groups who start to translate games voluntarily. So just seeking out those opportunities for your language might be a really interesting way to start with, because then when you start applying for an actual translation related job, you can show that, well, I have worked as a volunteer translator on these titles. Yeah, I think these would be the two main ways in.
Yeah, no, okay, that's good. Then we have another question that is if you have any advice for a small independent video game company that would like to add more localization to their work, but they have a low budget.
Yeah, the classic. Yeah. So I already mentioned community initiatives. Indies tend to have a really good relationship with their small but super enthusiastic community. So if you're an indie, you would probably not have these ginormous MMOs, right? It will probably be a smaller game with not a lot of text. So working with your community is definitely an interesting first step. Also, if you're a small company, you will probably want to reach out to an external specialist rather than hiring somebody full time, and they will be able to help you kind of scaling up gradually. So you've seen those 10 important markets that you should probably consider among the first to translate to. And then just pick, I will start with German and French and just do the most necessary parts of the game. And then if I'm successful and I get more money after release, then we start adding more languages, bigger support, etc. So taking it step by step is definitely a good idea, and working with the community.
Yeah, understood. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much.
Again?
Yeah. As usual. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tamara. No, it was really good, and I like a lot the zoom in, zoom out presentation from Prezi. So very good. Thank you for your availability. Thank you for your audience as well. If you want to reach out to Tamara, let us know, and so you can ask more questions if you want. And for now, hope you enjoyed the webinar, and remember to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date for the upcoming webinars, and see you next